Thank you all for joining us today. We are making some last minute updates to the interpretation. So we will start in a couple of minutes, but want to let you know we're making the webinar available in English and Spanish with simultaneous interpretation. The instructions for accessing the Spanish language audio channel are on your screen, and we will begin in a minute. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Neil. This is Mark Gutierrez. I'm your Spanish interpreter for today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for getting me situated. I appreciate it.
Okay. Are you ready to go?
I am. Feel free to put me in the Spanish channel whenever you are, and I'm good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. As I mentioned before, we are offering Spanish interpretation for this webinar. Please follow the instructions on your screen to access the Spanish language audio channel. So welcome to the public kickoff webinar for California's 5th Climate Change Assessment. We're very excited to see you all here today. My name is Neil Matuka. I'm the Program Manager for California's 5th Climate Change Assessment. And we'd like to start off today with a quick poll to see where everyone is joining us from. Hey, looks like we have a very good mix of folks from across the state. So welcome. We're excited to have you all here. A few quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. The chat function is not enabled, so please use the Q&A feature to submit questions during the webinar. We are offering a live transcription, which can be enabled by clicking the CC icon. And as we mentioned before, Spanish language interpretation is available by clicking the globe icon. Today's webinar will feature remarks from Director Acefa from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and Secretary Crowfoot from the Natural Resources Agency. I will be providing an overview of California's 5th Climate Change Assessment, and we are reserving most of the time today for a question and answer session. Now I am pleased to introduce Director Acefa.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hearing some echoes, but just want to say welcome to everyone who joined us this afternoon, and thank you, for making time for this important webinar. Today, for the first public event, this will be the first public event to kick off California's 5th Climate Change Assessment, an effort which the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, is proud to be leading. OPR has a mission and purpose to facilitate the state's research and planning needs and deliver guidance and tools to state agencies and local communities, bringing the perspectives of California's many diverse communities into these processes. And it is a key priority for launching the state's 5th Climate Change Assessment, the details of which you'll hear later from Neil Matuka of my staff. We are very excited to engage with tribes and to include tribal expertise and traditional knowledges in what has historically been a Western science-dominated process. The 5th Climate Assessment Project team exemplifies multidisciplinary interagency coordination, and this includes our work with multiple partners, including the California Natural Resources Agency, California Energy Commission, the California Strategic Growth Council, to ensure that questions about climate change reflect the communities and people that we serve. California has a strong history of producing climate change assessments. Through the years, these foundational and cutting-edge data, research, and tools have informed Californians across all sectors and regions on issues of critical importance to all of us, protecting public health and safety, reducing risks to communities, and building economic stability in the face of climate impacts such as drought, wildfire, and extreme heat. The assessments help us understand what climate change means for our future and empower us to plan accordingly. And the 5th assessment engagement process is a fundamental part of that assessment overall. Our success relies on robust engagement to uplift voices across the state, especially those whose voices have not traditionally been heard in the state's approach to managing land use and climate change issues. OPR is committed to meaningful government-to-government consultation and engagement with California Native American tribes. This event today marks the first of many opportunities for us to hear input that will help guide the work to come. We are already taking action to use feedback from past assessments and collect input on research topics to inform the 5th assessment process. Here to share more thoughts about the significance of the 5th assessment is my good friend and the Secretary of California's Natural Resources Agency, Wade Crawford. Wade.
Hey, Sam, thanks so much for introducing me and for your partnership on all things related to the climate assessment. Just want to confirm that you can see my video.
Yes,
there I am.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm actually down here in Los Angeles today, working with our water agencies to try to expand water conservation amidst worsening drought. And I think this underscores we are really on the front lines of climate change in this state we call California. We know that Mediterranean climates tend to be disproportionately impacted by accelerating climate change. So drought, wildfire, extreme heat impacts to our natural environments and certainly our communities. And so I'm really excited and eager to get this 5th climate assessment underway to really help us understand how we are being impacted by climate change and, importantly, what we need to do. And we are not going to repeat a past mistake in this climate assessment. Namely, we need to integrate traditional ecological knowledge and the wisdom and the insight of our tribal communities into our approaches for managing and protecting our state against climate change. And I'm so proud of the work that our team is doing and initiating listening sessions like this, where we can actually listen and learn and institutionalize tribal perspectives and empower tribes to, as appropriate, share perspectives with state government that are actually going to help our collective efforts to combat climate change. We all know that California Native American communities are the original stewards of our lands and our waters and our environment. And for millennia, they cared for and stewarded this incredible natural environment we have in California. We also know that when colonization occurred, we in the state government not only disconnected ourselves from that tribal knowledge and leadership, institutions we represent perpetrated, a remarkable set of wrongs, including a state-sponsored policy of genocide that really was present at the founding of our state. One of my most meaningful moments in public service was witnessing Governor Newsom's apology on behalf of California to tribal leaders for those historic wrongs, including that initial genocidal policy. And I think most who witnessed it that day would call it a really important moment and symbolically powerful. But we know that words alone are not adequate to redress this history and build a shared future. So across our agencies, we're each on our own journey to listen and learn from tribal communities, tribal governments, to understand how we can be strengthening partnerships with California tribes on the work that we do. I'm really proud of that the Natural Resources Agency. We're working to institutionalize partnerships. Governor Newsom appointed our first ever Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs, Geneva E.B. Thompson, who's really leading an effort of tribal liaisons across our broad agency to institutionalize government-to-government consultations that occur early and often and are truly meaningful to informing and shaping decisions, advancing wherever possible the return of ancestral lands to California the tribal governments and communities, and exploring and advancing meaningful co-management agreements between tribes and state government to manage our natural resources. And in this journey of education that I've been on, learning from our tribal partners, we've heard loud and clear just the importance of ensuring traditional ecological knowledge and tribal expertise actually inform all that we're doing, not only on natural resources policy, but on all of our climate change policy. And that relationship needs to be respectful. That knowledge transfer needs to occur on the terms that tribal communities and governments are comfortable with. And frankly, we need to reshape the way we go about our work by integrating these perspectives. One great example is in the area of building our resilience to catastrophic wildfire and reintroducing tribal practices of cultural burning and prescribed burning that were present pre-contact and a large reason why our landscapes were managed so effectively. That was a practice that was outlawed by state government, and only very recently we've acknowledged the grave error of our ways, and we are now working to learn from tribal practitioners to expand cultural burning and prescribed burning across the state. Just one small example of where we feel like we need to benefit from this knowledge and leadership. So I'm really proud of one of our entities in our agency, the California Energy Commission, for developing the Tribal Research Grant Program, which is within the 5th Climate Assessment, which Sam touched on or explained. And the idea here is to fund tribal research that will inform all that California does on climate change. You'll hear more about the way we're approaching this grant program, but it's really intended to provide resources to support tribal capacity and research. Really, again, on the terms of tribal practitioners to contribute to this body of knowledge that we need to show the world how to combat climate change and to protect our communities and nature in the meantime. Really appreciative of taking the time to share your perspective during this listening session, and in advance, look forward to all of the partnerships and the collaboration we can achieve throughout the term of this 5th climate assessment. So with that broadly said, Sam laying out sort of the reason for these climate assessments, these scientific assessments, and the importance now, and for me, hopefully articulating just how important it is to have tribal knowledge and expertise at the center of this 5th climate assessment. I want to turn it over to one of our colleagues at OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, Neil Matuka, who is the program manager of our 5th climate assessment, and he's going to provide more specific information on the goals and timeline to really provide context for the listening session here today. So let me turn it over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Director Acefa and Secretary Crowfoot, for your words and introduction to this momentous event. We appreciate your time and effort that you have invested into the 5th assessment. Now, before we get into the presentation, we'd like to ask everyone to answer another poll and let us know how familiar you are with the previous assessment. And we again have a good mix of folks who are very familiar with the assessment or use it in different parts of their work, and newcomers. So welcome everyone. We hope that this is an informative listening session or a workshop for everyone. And we look forward to your questions that you'll have later on. So kind of some of the key updates to California's climate change assessment process. With the passage of Senate Bill 1320, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research is the interagency coordinator of the 5th assessment in partnership with the California Natural Resources Agency, California Energy Commission, and California Strategic Growth Council. We do also want to highlight all of the work other state agencies have put into supporting previous assessments in developing the 5th assessment framework and in working with us moving forward. We've also hired a dedicated team to oversee the administration and rollout of the 5th assessment and have funding to support the development of an extensive suite of cutting-edge research on climate change. Now, you may hear this referred to as the climate change assessment, climate assessment, or 5th assessment, and these are all ways to refer to the same process, California's 5th climate change assessment. And I also wanted to make another note at this point. This is a significant undertaking, and some parts are going to be further along than others, so we may not have all of the answers yet. And we're very lucky to be building on a long history of California assessments, starting with the first climate impacts report from the Energy Commission in 1989. And since 2006, at the direction of Executive Order S305, the state has completed 4 comprehensive climate change assessments designed to assess the impacts and risks from climate change to inform policy actions. The first 2 assessments focused on understanding climate change and statewide impact. The 3rd and 4th assessments began to examine the nuances of regional impact. And with the passage of Senate Bill 1320 in 2020, California's 5th climate change assessment is now underway, building on the strengths and closing some of the gaps of previous assessments. Here you can see our overall timeline for the 5-year cycle of the 5th assessment. We're going to walk through each of the pieces, but I want to first draw your attention to the public engagement component along the top of the timeline. As Director Acefa and Secretary Crowfoot pointed out, our engagement process is a key function of the 5th assessment throughout the entire 5-year timeline. Events like this one are fundamental to our success, and I will touch on how you can remain involved and informed in a future slide. First, the Energy Commission is leading the production of downscaled climate change projections and data, including climate scenarios such as wildfire and hydrologic modeling. As in past assessments, We will also support the development or improvement of various climate planning and visualization tools, such as CalAdapt visualizations and the new CalAdapt analytics engine for computational and analytic support. The Energy Commission is also leading the development of original climate research focused on the energy sector. And OPR is working with the Natural Resources Agency to produce original climate research on non-energy topics. The energy research is already underway, and we are currently creating the guidelines and scope for the non-energy research. Building on lessons learned from the fourth assessment, the fifth assessment is standing up our first ever tribal research program. We will be prioritizing early, often, and meaningful consultation with California Native American tribes. Led by our colleague, Patricia Kennedy, the tribal research program will focus on consultation with tribes and the integration of traditional knowledges into the fifth assessment product. Included in this program are a tribal advisory group comprised of representatives from California tribes to guide the tribal research program, providing advice for the next 4 years on topics such as ensuring research priorities are meaningful and beneficial to California tribes. A tribal grant program, co-managed by the Energy Commission, will support tribal participation, capacity, and encourage tribally led research in the fifth assessment. The integration of traditional knowledges and tribal expertise into fifth assessment reports, where meaningful for tribes and culturally appropriate, as well as the tribal synthesis report. This will be similar to the fourth assessment, tribal and indigenous report, that will assess climate impacts to tribal communities statewide. The synthesis of the climate projections data and original climate research will culminate in a series of reports that will call attention to particular topics of interest. Per our defining statute, this will include a tribal report and a report on environmental justice. However, we intend to support additional topics based on the feedback we receive in the coming months. We will also develop regionally specific information to help guide communities in responding to the impacts of climate change that affect their particular area. Finally, a statewide summary report will be developed to highlight major findings and lessons learned throughout the assessment. How can you get involved? We have a number of ways to participate at this point. We're launching a survey where you can provide your ideas for the fifth assessment research scope. We'll be providing links to that. We will also be reporting back on the research topic identification process, as well as hosting future events like this, including more locally and regionally focused events. So please stay tuned for updates and announcements on these opportunities by joining our listserv. Now I'd like to welcome Natural Resources Agency Deputy Secretary for Climate Change, Amanda Hansen, to help answer your questions. And please provide any questions that you have using the Q&A function. Okay, we have our first questions rolling in. We have a question on the non-energy reports. Who is doing the public and worker health assessments for both indoor and outdoor environments, especially for extreme heat? That's a good question, and that is actually the purpose of us doing our RFP in the near future. We have not identified the researchers yet. These opportunities will be released through an RFP where we will be encouraging folks to propose research topics that will then be funded. How do we join the listserv? Great question. We will be there will be a link on the later chat or later slide, and we will be providing the link to our website as well as the link to join our listserv in the chat as well. What year will the regional reports be available? We don't have a firm date on those yet. As we said, everything's still in kind of in the planning phases a couple of years out. We're anticipating that those are towards the end of the assessment. So likely sometime at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. How will local involvement opportunities be released? That's a great question. We are looking to hear from folks the ways in which they'd like to be involved. We will be hosting sessions like this, and we'll be looking to incorporate that into our process moving forward. So we don't have a firm answer yet, but we will be including local involvement. Can you provide more details about the research calls, energy and non-energy? And is there a web link for these proposal calls? We don't have more information about those yet. We're currently developing the research calls, and we will post information about those on our website when they're available. Will the chapters of the report be organized in a similar way by region and with special topics? That is another question that we're looking at right now. We are thinking that they will probably be organized in a similar fashion. How are the authors for the reports going to be selected? We do not have a process yet for selecting authors of reports. But for the core technical reports, the original climate research, that will be done through an RFP process, a proposal process. In my jurisdiction, we need more locally specific information on climate impacts that the fourth assessment did not cover for our area. Will the fifth assessment expand the area covered for multiple impacts? How can we ensure this gets included? I'm not quite sure, to be honest, at this point. We are looking at making sure that we're incorporating community input, especially into the regional and topical reports. Our hope is that this process can address gaps that communities found in the fourth assessment. So I would encourage you to look forward to our regional and local meetings as we start to ramp up the development of what it looks like to have a regional and topical report and be involved in that process. Will the RFP be directed towards California-based researchers only, or can non-California-based researchers contribute to the fifth assessment? That I do not know the answer to that question. Amanda, do you know?
No, I don't actually. I think, our assessment process has evolved with each assessment as things, as time has moved on. And so, as Neil mentioned at the top of our call, there's some things that we've been able to sort of think through and frame out, and others that we're still working on. So it's a great question, and we'll make sure that we can clarify that in the near term.
Thank you. Will there be grant rounds for research science proposals? There has been rounds for the energy core technical reports, and we will be releasing an RFP for the non-energy core technical reports, or original climate research, as we're calling it. And that will come sometime towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. Will there be an economic impact report as part of the synthesis report? Is economic impact integrated into other reports listed earlier. We will be looking at economics. How that is integrated as its own report or into other reports has not been determined yet, but that is on our radar. Will you interface with the numerous city and county climate commission staff and plans? And how? Well, we will be including communities as partners in the fifth assessment process, and especially making sure that their needs are identified through the tool development and research development processes. We do not have specific plans at this point, but we will be making sure that everyone who can use fifth assessment products is included. What will be the major changes from the fourth to fifth assessment? That is a great question. I think the biggest changes are that we have a team acting as an interagency coordinator and funding for positions at each of the agencies that form up the fifth assessment team. That provides us a certain level of stability and the ability to do long-range planning. And because of funding for the products, we're able to provide funding to develop those so that it's not based on as much volunteer work. And it gives us the opportunity to do innovative programs like the Tribal Research Program. But otherwise, we're trying to build on the model of previous assessments. So we're using a similar structure. What is expected of public higher education institutions within the state, and how can they partner with state and regional agencies to address and incorporate climate resiliency planning? Well, we will be working with public higher education institutions throughout the state at various points in the process through identifying research gaps, making sure that they're aware of solicitations, and participate in the process. We are hoping that there are partnerships between different groups who can support the use of the types of data products that come out of the fifth assessment. And Amanda, I'll hand it over to you for the next one.
Recently, Governor Newsom announced an $80 billion investment in combating climate change. Are your agencies involved? If so, how will this done? It is true that the governor and the legislature have worked on a historic level of funding for climate action. And yes, the Resources Agency and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research are involved in numerous budget proposals. And I would also just add that our partner agencies who we will be working with to drive on the fifth assessment and who we work with all the time on our climate resilience priorities also have a major role to play in moving that funding as quickly as possible, given the amount of time that science tells us we have to really address the climate crisis before the worst impacts of climate change arrive. So yes, and many more of us are working on this as well.
Will there be opportunities for paying jobs for tribal and citizen science researchers? That's a great question. We are looking at making sure that those who participate in the assessment in a formal manner are fairly compensated. We cannot speak at this point to what that looks like. That's still being developed or planned for. But we do anticipate this time around being able to provide some level of compensation. PEK and Native American tribes are a clear focus, but what steps are being taken towards climate justice for other communities? And is this just as much of a focus? Great question. I would say that it is. We have a couple of concrete ways in which we're addressing that right now. And the first would be bolstering our public engagement and engagement with communities and community groups. We didn't want to be too prescriptive upfront, so we're making sure that we're including communities, especially environmental justice organizations, in the process so that that can help mold what the process looks like moving forward. We do also have one of our topical reports is an equity and environmental justice report, and we'll be looking at how we can also incorporate that into the other products of the fifth assessment. And I'd like to call my colleague Patricia up to address the next question.
Thank you, Neil. Do you plan any meetings that would bring together researchers and communities, tribes, et cetera, to help create connections? You know, I think we do. Like Neil said, we're in the very initial stages of this. We still are standing up a tribal advisory group who I think is going to be a key component in how all of our different researchers are interacting with each other. But thank you very much for bringing that question. Hopefully we'll have some more concrete plans and a path forward on what that looks like in future webinars. So thank you for that question.
Patricia, can you take the next one as well?
Sure thing. How can we, Mendocino County Department of Public Health, find out which tribes locally are involved and who the contacts are so we can collaborate? Yeah, you know, feel free to reach out to me. We are, like I said, in the initial stages. So to be completely honest, we are also still figuring out which tribes are wishing to be involved. But as we move forward, I think those collaborations are going to be essential to the success of the fifth assessment for all of Californians. So you continue to be involved, reach out to me, and we will make sure that those connections are made as appropriate moving forward.
Thank you. Will regional report authors be selected through a call? And how will regions be selected? And is there funding for regional reports this time? Well, I can start with the easiest. There is funding for regional reports this time. And we are determining right now whether or not the regions need to change from the fourth assessment, or if there are tweaks that can be made to better meet the needs of communities in those regional reports. We have not determined how report authors will be selected at this time. Do you plan any meetings that would bring together researchers and communities, tribes, et cetera, to help create connections? This one I can say very confidently, yes. We don't know what those look like right now, but that is a primary focus of the fifth assessment this time around. Part of that will be through our incorporation of SGC's climate change research model that incorporates community input and direction into research. So we are planning on having regional and local meetings to facilitate these connections and make sure that that's built into the process moving forward. How will the California assessment coordinate with the currently underway national climate assessment? I am in connection with the leadership of the national assessment, and we are working with them to make sure that we learn from each other where applicable, and that we are able to coordinate, especially on aligning data and reports. Will there be technical working groups for specific topics that stakeholders can participate in? Again, we don't know exactly how the process will work, but we do know that we will need the technical expertise of everyone in the state. So I think there will be opportunities to engage. And if you have specific technical expertise, we will welcome that. Will lead authoring chapters of the report be a funded activity? Yes, this time around, we have funding for all of the reports and tools that we will be developing. So we do anticipate being able to compensate authors this time around. Amanda, could you take the next one?
The question is, how will the fifth assessment intersect with the new extreme heat action plan? And I'll answer this question a little bit even sort of broader than necessarily the extreme heat action plan, which is to say, it is, I think California has a long legacy of taking climate action based on best available science. And when we think about the work ahead of us to reduce climate risks in the near, mid, and long term, those decisions are going to be based on best available climate science. And for California, in many ways, that is the assessments have been the foundation for our decision making. And so I would say that the next update to our action plan on extreme heat, as well as the next update to our state adaptation strategy, or to any other sort of sector specific climate resilience strategy or plan, will be informed by the science that comes out of the fifth climate change assessment. So there is a critical connection, almost sort of the foundation that all of those other strategies evolve from and lean on heavily.
Will the assessment report include preservation of historic and cultural resources? We don't know what the reports will include at this point, but we can certainly highlight that as something that is of interest. I would also encourage you to submit that through our research survey, which is open to anyone. Feel free to distribute that. We're looking for gaps in the research that can support the assessment. So do feel free to pass that along to anyone and not just those on the webinar. Do you anticipate one big RFP for the non-energy research, or will there be a series of RFPs? At this point, we are anticipating a single RFP that will fund research addressing multiple topics, but we don't know how that will work, so leaving ourselves open to that process. You can receive notifications when the RFPs are released by joining our listserv on our website. Patricia, could you take this next question?
Sure. The question is, does the Bureau of Indian Affairs have a role in any part of this assessment? So similar to what Neil referenced, we are working pretty closely with the National Climate Assessment. The Tribal Research Program is doing the same. So we've been in contact with the lead authors and program managers of the tribal report for the national assessment. And of course, this includes some key authors from Bureau of Indian Affairs. So we are collaborating in the same way as Neil referenced earlier.
You take the next question as well.
Sure. So the question is, who will participate in the tribal advisory group? And then a second part of that, will you be including California tribal organizations in the tribal advisory group? perhaps with a nomination or appointment of regional tribes, or can we provide connections to tribes we know working on climate? This is a really great question. Right now, we are accepting nominations from both tribes, tribal representatives, and folks from tribal organizations with nominations or recommendation letters from a tribe. So that's where we are right now with that. We absolutely recommend you providing connections to tribes if you know they're working on climate work locally. That would be wonderful. We do have 2 tribal listening sessions next week. If you email me, I can provide you the registration for those. And then nominations are simply an email to me with a resume, a CV, and then that letter of recommendation from a tribe to my email address, which I think has already been dropped in the chat.
Thank you. Will the assessment be analyzing the economic costs of inaction? We do not know what the economic studies will be at this point, but we do know that we will be looking at economic impact throughout the assessment. I'd like to call on my colleague Susan Wilhelm to answer some questions specific to energy.
Thank you, Neil. I will start with how does the 5th assessment interact with CalAdapt? And I apologize, I posted a response in response to the wrong question. But I will start by saying that ongoing CEC funded grants are developing 5th assessment climate projections, as well as hydrological scenarios and wildfire scenarios. And we're also working closely with our partners at OPR to update the interactive web application that provides interactive visualizations and easy to access data. In the meantime, as many of you are aware, we also have an effort to develop a CalAdapt analytics engine, which lives at the website analytics.caladapt.org. And this will transform 5th assessment projections into kernels of insight that directly inform energy sector stakeholders, for example, providing model inputs and other support for climate-informed planning. You can also learn more about the efforts that CEC has underway that relate to CalAdapt at the meeting archive for an April 28th presentation at the Climate Data and Analytics Working Group, and I will throw that in the chat in just a moment. Okay, the next question I see is, how will the new CalAdapt work compare to the current work? Will it only be downscaling the new climate models and scenarios, or will there be new tools and higher resolution of projections? I will start by saying the 5th assessment projections are higher resolution. We're working on an approximately 3 by 3 kilometer grid as opposed to the 6 by 6 grid we had with the 4th assessment. Regarding CalAdapt and how it will compare to what you are already familiar with, I will say we are building on a familiar foundation while at the same time expanding it with the CalAdapt analytics engine to provide unprecedented computational and analytical resources that directly foster climate-informed planning. We are really trying to bridge the gap between providing data and supporting action. Let's see, my next question is, will we be assessing grid capacity and planning, especially as we move toward electrification of both vehicles and the built environment? Absolutely, these questions are on our mind. We are launching several grants this summer to support climate-informed planning for a grid that is in transition towards 100% zero carbon electricity, for a grid that requires rapid build out of renewables, while at the same time, the electricity sector is absorbing new roles, new loads. So this is a space we're working in, and we would welcome hearing additional thoughts about gaps here.
Thank you, Susan. Climate change conditions are moving rapidly. How is your 5-year project organized so that the findings are timely and organized for communities to implement the necessary policies and actions? That's a great question. And I think the answer is that we are doing the best that we can. We recognize that the best available data isn't always available as quickly as we need it. So we're producing data and new reports and new research as quickly as is possible within the boundaries of best applicable science and these processes. I think that we are developing many of these with the changing conditions in mind, and hope that we're able to take that into account when looking forward, and that many of the actions may be the same with a certain level of uncertainty in the future. But excellent question, thank you. How will environmental justice and equity in the built environment be addressed, and how can community and design professionals with expertise be involved in research and writing? I would encourage you to submit research ideas through our survey, so that when those ideas are either released through the original climate research RFP or incorporated into later products, that you're able to propose or participate as an expert or community member. Amanda, can you take this next question?
Will you be engaging with federal land management agencies to access data sets and or studies they've produced on climate change impacts they're tracking/studying? This is a really good question. And I believe the answer is yes. I think, the assessment process is both involves sort of understanding the state of the science right now, and it also involves undertaking original climate research. And so I think integrating, the final products will integrate both. I also want to point out that there are a number of products that will be delivered through the 5th assessment. And I think there's a good chance that depending on what the research priorities are that come in and other input that we receive, there could be a number of other ways that data and studies undertaken by partners around the state could get integrated into some of those deliverables. So that could be, one of the reports, or perhaps a tool or some other outcome that is determined over the course of these years is needed and could be helpful. So I appreciate the question, and my fundamental answer is that kind of partnership and connectivity is just going to be really important for the process. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. We really appreciate this conversation, and we look forward to having more conversations like this moving forward. We would welcome additional questions and comments by emailing us at climateassessment@opr.ca.gov, as you see on your screen. You can learn more about the 4th assessment at climateassessment.ca.gov, and you can track updates and announcements on the 5th assessment, this current assessment process, by visiting the OPR page you see on your screen. I'm sorry, I'm not going to read that. But we look forward to working with you moving forward, and thank you very much for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful evening.